There is a moment every year in America when the justice system becomes painfully quiet. No flashing lights, no courtroom arguments, no juries debating guilt or innocence. Just a document, a list, typed in plain language, filed in official records, and published with almost no ceremony. It does not scream. It does not argue. It simply states dates, names, states, and an outcome that cannot be misunderstood. This is the execution calendar. For most people, the list passes unnoticed. Life continues. Work schedules are planned. Sports seasons begin. Families gather for holidays. But for a small number of men and women housed deep inside maximum security prisons, that list changes the way time feels forever. Because once a date appears next to a name, the future stops being abstract. It becomes numbered. This documentary begins there. Not with crimes, not with verdicts, but with the moment the system says, this is when it ends. If you're watching this, take a second. Stay with the story. These are not headlines you'll hear every day, and understanding them matters more than ever. In 2026, several U.S. states have scheduled executions. Each date represents decades of investigation, trials, appeals, and legal arguments. Each one also represents years of waiting, isolation, and psychological pressure that very few people will ever experience or fully understand. This is not about spectacle. This is about process, and about what happens when the most powerful punishment a government can impose is finally put on the calendar. The list does not explain how someone got there. It does not mention the jury deliberations that lasted for days. It does not show the appeals denied with a single sentence. It does not capture the moment an inmate is told that a warrant has been signed. It only shows the result of everything that came before. In Texas, Ohio, Tennessee, Florida, and other states that still enforce capital punishment, the legal machinery has continued to move forward. Some cases date back to the 1980s and 1990s. Some defendants were in their 20s when they entered death row. By the time their execution dates were set, many had grown old behind concrete walls. What makes this list unsettling is not only its finality. It is its simplicity. No emotion, no commentary, just the administrative conclusion of a legal journey that may have lasted longer than most viewers have been alive. Inside prison walls, the announcement of an execution date is not delivered dramatically. It usually comes quietly. A guard, a piece of paper, sometimes a short meeting with prison staff. Sometimes a lawyer arrives first. But once it happens, nothing feels the same again. Time, which once stretched endlessly, suddenly becomes sharp and specific. Months are counted backward. Weeks are measured differently. Even hours feel heavier. Some inmates mark the days. Others refuse to acknowledge them at all. For families on the outside, the list reopens wounds that never fully healed. For victims' families, it can bring anticipation, anxiety, or unresolved questions. For the families of the condemned, it can feel like a second sentence being carried out in slow motion. And for the public, the list often sparks a familiar debate. Is this justice? Is it closure? Is it necessary? Or is it irreversible punishment carried out by a system that has made mistakes before? As this documentary unfolds, we will examine how these execution dates came to be. We will explore the legal steps that move a case from conviction to warrant. We will look at the psychological impact of waiting on death row. And we will examine the broader implications of capital punishment in modern America. But first, we need to understand the power of the list itself. The execution calendar is not permanent. Dates can be stayed. Appeals can be granted. Governors can issue reprieves. Courts can intervene at the last moment. History has shown that even hours before an execution, everything can change. Or nothing can. That uncertainty is part of the punishment. Not knowing whether today is just another day or the beginning of the end. For inmates scheduled in 2026, the legal system has determined that the appeals process has reached its final stages. Their convictions have been reviewed by state courts, federal courts, and in some cases, the Supreme Court of the United States. The dates reflect the state's belief that due process has been completed. But belief and certainty are not always the same thing. Capital punishment operates under the promise of finality. Once carried out, it cannot be undone. That reality places enormous weight on every decision leading up to it. Judges know this. Prosecutors know this. Defense attorneys know this. And yet, history shows that wrongful convictions, procedural errors, and flawed evidence have all played roles in death penalty cases before. That is why this list matters. It is not just a schedule. It is a snapshot of where the American justice system stands right now, who it has decided deserves the ultimate punishment, and when it plans to carry it out. If you've ever wondered how someone ends up on death row for decades, or what it means when the system finally sets a date, this story is for you. And as we move forward, it's worth asking yourself a question that has followed capital punishment for generations. What does justice mean when time runs out? As we move into the next chapter, we will step inside the machinery of the system itself. We will break down how a death sentence survives years of scrutiny, how appeals are exhausted, and how a case reaches the point where a name is finally added to the list. Stay with us. This is where the process truly begins. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe understanding the justice system is important, you already know what to do. These conversations only grow when more people take part. The American justice system is enormous. It's intricate. It's deliberate. And for those whose names appear on the death row calendar, it is unforgiving. Every decision, every ruling, every motion filed and denied becomes part of a machine whose gears grind slowly, but inevitably, toward one outcome. In this chapter, we pull back the curtain to show the system itself, the bureaucracy, the courtrooms, the appeal processes, and the lives they touch along the way. To the casual observer, the system can feel abstract. Judges in black robes, lawyers shuffling papers, jury members listening quietly. But each motion, each objection, each delay carries real weight. Years of study, legal strategy, and precedent determine whether an inmate moves closer to freedom or closer to execution. The law is meticulous because, at its core, it carries the power to end a life. When a person is convicted of a capital crime, the system immediately begins a process designed to balance two opposing forces: justice and due process. On one hand, society demands accountability for acts deemed unconscionable. On the other, the system must ensure that the punishment is fair, measured, and legally sound. Every appeal, every hearing, and every review serves as a safeguard, but it can also be a source of torment, a limbo that stretches over decades. Consider the appellate process. After conviction, a defense team often files motions for retrials, examines evidence for flaws, questions jury instructions, and sometimes uncovers previously overlooked facts. The prosecution responds in kind, arguing for the sentence to stand. These legal battles may climb from county courts to state appellate courts, and, in rare cases, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Each step takes months, sometimes years, and with each decision, the psychological stakes rise. For the inmate, the system is both a shield and a tormentor. It offers the possibility of relief, but it also keeps them suspended in uncertainty. Days on death row stretch into years. Time loses its usual meaning. Each letter from an attorney, each court docket update, can feel like a heartbeat, the rhythm of a life counting down in slow motion. For the families of victims and the families of the condemned, this process is equally torturous. The system promises finality but delivers suspense, tension, and doubt. State-by-state variations compound the complexity. Texas, with its historically high number of executions, has developed a system that moves quickly once appeals are exhausted. Ohio, on the other hand, faces challenges with lethal injection protocols, which have delayed executions for years. Tennessee's process emphasizes careful review of both the conviction and the appeals, reflecting a legal culture cautious about irreversible punishment. Florida, historically a battleground for death penalty debates, maintains a legal framework that ensures multiple reviews before an execution is allowed. Each state adds its own layer of procedural complexity, yet the end goal, the execution date, remains singular and definitive. The system is also human, and human error cannot be ignored. Judges may misinterpret evidence. Prosecutors may overreach. Defense attorneys may lack the resources to fully investigate. Evidence can be mishandled, and witness memories can fade. In death penalty cases, where the stakes are literally life and death, these imperfections take on enormous significance. History has repeatedly demonstrated that mistakes can have fatal consequences. Yet, within this human machinery, certain rules are rigid and relentless. Once a death sentence is affirmed through the highest available appeals, a state issues a death warrant. This is not a recommendation. It is not optional. It is a legally binding declaration that the condemned will face execution on a specific date. For some, this warrant comes decades after the initial conviction, a reminder that in the legal system, time is measured differently than in ordinary life. It is within this context that the psychological pressure intensifies. For decades, inmates may hope for relief from the courts, only to have appeals denied or delayed. Each failed appeal is a reminder of the irreversible nature of their situation. Every successful motion that is denied at a higher level is a tease, a flicker of hope extinguished by the machinery of the system. And all the while, the execution calendar looms, precise and unmoving. Courts do not operate in isolation. Each case interacts with precedent, statutes, and political realities. Legislatures define what constitutes a capital crime. Governors have the power to commute sentences or grant stays of execution. Prosecutors' offices vary in resources and philosophy. Advocacy groups, both for and against capital punishment, monitor cases closely, sometimes intervening through legal amicus briefs or public campaigns. Media coverage can amplify public scrutiny, placing additional pressure on courts and officials. The system, while procedural, is constantly influenced by human belief, societal expectation, and the weight of past errors. Amid all this, the condemned experience a distinct form of psychological warfare, what researchers describe as death row syndrome. Isolation, uncertainty, and the knowledge of a fixed end date combine to create profound mental stress. Sleep becomes difficult, perception of time blurs, and every minor procedural detail can feel monumental. Letters arrive with news from attorneys or courts. Each notice is scrutinized, analyzed, and often misread in the fear and tension that accompanies waiting for a legal system that operates slowly but inexorably. And yet, for all its pressure, the system also represents society's attempt to balance morality, law, and fairness. Execution dates are not arbitrary. They are the product of careful review, legal precedent, and procedural steps designed to ensure the punishment is applied correctly. Whether or not the system succeeds perfectly is a matter of ongoing debate, but its weight, complexity, and inescapability are undeniable. For viewers, understanding this machinery is critical. It is not just about who is on the list. It is about how they got there, what procedural barriers were crossed, and what psychological toll has accumulated along the way. In this chapter, we uncover the inner workings of the system, the steps, the delays, the human judgment, and the legal finality that combine to make the calendar a reality. It is here, in this machinery, that the story becomes more than numbers. Each name on the list is entwined with a web of hearings, rulings, and motions. Each date is the culmination of painstaking, often agonizing legal process. And each case is a testament to the delicate balance between society's desire for justice and the individual's right to due process. As we move forward, the narrative will shift from the system itself to the individuals who live, breathe, and exist within it. The next chapter will explore the personal side of death row, not just the names and dates, but the human stories, the personalities, and the realities of living in confinement for years with the knowledge that every day brings them closer to the execution chamber. By examining the system in Chapter 2, we gain perspective. We see how law, procedure, and human judgment intersect. We understand why a list exists, why a date can be set decades after a crime, and why the psychological toll is so severe. And we begin to sense the immense complexity that surrounds each person scheduled for execution in 2026. This is not a story of spectacle. It is a story of systems, of law, and of human endurance. The names and dates on the list are not just legal notations. They are the output of a network of courts, appeals, attorneys, judges, and procedures, each one contributing to a finality that cannot be undone. In the next chapter, we will meet the people behind the cases, the human stories, the hopes, the regrets, and the psychological scars that remain after decades in confinement. The system is complete only when it touches real lives. And it is in those lives that the full weight of the death penalty is revealed. If you feel drawn to the story so far, engage with it. Comment on what you feel about the system. Subscribe to ensure these important stories continue to reach more viewers. Every voice adds to the conversation and keeps these stories in the public eye. Behind every name on the execution calendar is a story, not a headline. not a statistic, not a court docket number. A human story, a life compressed into decades of confinement, filtered through the narrow lens of the justice system. These are the people who spend their days in cells measured in feet and hours, whose identities are reduced to a name on a list and a date in a calendar. To the public, they may seem abstract. To the victims' families, they may be symbols of loss or fear. To the inmates themselves, every day is lived in the shadow of the date that looms inevitably in the future. That shadow shapes every thought, every conversation, every action, and even the most mundane parts of life. Consider Charles Victor Thompson, scheduled for execution in Texas. On paper, he is simply a number in the system, a legal entity defined by convictions and court rulings. In reality, he is a man whose life has been shaped by choices, regrets, and decades spent in isolation. His cell walls have witnessed the quiet moments of reflection, the unspoken conversations with the self, and the small acts of survival that allow a human being to endure the psychological weight of knowing a state has scheduled the end of his life. Then there is Ronald Heath in Florida. To understand him, one must imagine decades of navigating a system designed to strip away individuality while simultaneously scrutinizing every action, every word, and every moment for legality. For Heath, the system is both a lifeline and a tormentor. Appeals offer hope, yes, but they also reinforce the inevitability of what awaits. Hope and fear coexist in constant tension, a psychological trap in which every letter from an attorney can feel like a heartbeat counting down. Kendrick Simpson in Oklahoma, Cedric Ricks and James Broadnax in Texas, Tony Carruthers in Tennessee, Gerald R. Hand in Ohio, they share a common thread. Their stories are separated by geography, decades, and circumstances, yet they are bound by the same relentless pattern: conviction, sentence, appeals, and finally, the looming execution date. Each of them is human, each has a history, and each endures an emotional reality that most people cannot imagine. Death row is a world apart. It is a society of its own. Rules govern every movement, from waking hours to meals, from visitation to recreation. Privacy is limited, choice is constrained, and interaction with the outside world is minimal. Within these parameters, inmates develop coping mechanisms. Some write letters endlessly, others read obsessively. Some create art, some retreat into silence. Time, measured in years and decades rather than minutes and hours, dominates the rhythm of life. The psychological weight of life on death row cannot be overstated. Studies and interviews with long-term death row inmates reveal patterns that resemble what psychologists call death row syndrome, a combination of depression, anxiety, and emotional flattening. Sleep is often disrupted. Paranoia can take hold. Relationships, even with fellow inmates, are cautious and distant. Yet amidst this, there is resilience. Some inmates maintain dignity, develop routines, and find meaning in small acts, helping others, reading, writing, or learning new skills. And yet, there is always the list. Every inmate knows it exists. They know the dates assigned to them. They know the state has decided when their life will end. The calendar is a quiet, cruel presence. It transforms ordinary life into a countdown. Even mundane moments, taking a shower, walking in a small yard, speaking with a visitor, are under the shadow of that date. It is a psychological pressure unlike any other. Families on the outside often experience parallel torment. Parents, siblings, and children of the condemned live in a different kind of limbo, one filled with public scrutiny, judgment, and emotional isolation. Visits are both a relief and a reminder of the inevitable. Each conversation with a loved one can be colored by the knowledge that the world outside continues while inside. Time is measured differently, compressed, and relentless. Victims' families, too, navigate an emotional landscape that is uniquely complex. For some, the scheduling of an execution brings closure, a sense that justice has finally been realized. For others, it reignites grief, anger, and unresolved pain. The system attempts to serve both sides, yet emotions cannot be legislated. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways that no legal argument can contain. The humanity of death row inmates is often obscured by the crimes they committed, yet understanding it is essential to understanding the system itself. They are parents, siblings, children, and friends. They have dreams, failures, regrets, and reflections. They have endured not only the legal system, but also the social and psychological isolation imposed by long-term confinement. Their days are punctuated by the sound of keys, the clatter of doors, and the occasional echo of distant voices, a soundtrack of life compressed into tight corridors of steel and concrete. Some inmates spend their time reflecting on choices made decades earlier. Others confront the loneliness of long nights in dimly lit cells. Many wrestle with the existential weight of knowing their lives are scheduled to end. The human psyche responds in myriad ways. Some become introspective, some resigned, some desperately cling to hope for stays, appeals, or clemency. The emotional landscape is wide, complex, and layered. Yet amidst all of this, small acts of humanity persist. Letters exchanged with family or pen pals. Books written in notebooks that may never leave the cell. Conversations with chaplains or psychologists. Small routines that bring a sense of normalcy to days otherwise dominated by the shadow of a date on a calendar. In these moments, inmates demonstrate a resilience that is both remarkable and heartbreaking. Understanding the people on death row is essential because it reminds viewers that behind each name on the 2026 execution calendar is a human being whose life has been shaped by countless forces: family, society, chance, choice, and circumstance. They are not abstractions. They are people, fully realized in their fears, hopes, regrets, and reflections. As we continue, it becomes clear that the death penalty is not just a legal concept. It is an emotional and psychological reality experienced by real people. The human stories behind the cases are as essential to understanding the system as the laws themselves. Inmates, families, lawyers, and even correctional staff are all participants in a story that is ongoing, fraught, and deeply complex. This chapter is about empathy, not for the crimes, not for absolution, but for understanding the human cost of a system that balances law, punishment, and moral responsibility. It is a reminder that justice is not merely a legal procedure. It is experienced in the hearts, minds, and souls of those involved. As we prepare to move into Chapter 4, we will delve deeper into the waiting, the psychological and emotional toll of time itself. Here, the narrative shifts further inward, exploring how years of confinement, isolation, and anticipation transform human lives in ways both subtle and profound. If you felt the weight of these stories, let it resonate. Comment, share, and subscribe, because these human stories need to be seen, understood, and discussed. They are not just news items. They are lives, paused under the shadow of a date on the execution calendar. Time behaves differently on death row. Outside the walls, minutes tick by unnoticed. Weeks are measured by appointments, events, or social milestones. Inside, time stretches and bends, folding in on itself like an endless echo. Days become indistinct. Weeks and months blur. Years may pass in a haze of confinement, routine, and anxiety. For those whose names appear on the 2026 execution calendar, waiting is a punishment in itself, arguably as formidable as any sentence rendered by a court. The psychological experience of waiting on death row is profound. Sleep comes fitfully, if at all. The mind oscillates between hope and despair, memory and imagination, guilt and self-reflection. Inmates learn to navigate the constant uncertainty because even the most meticulously scheduled execution can be delayed, stayed, or commuted, but these rare reprieves are not guarantees of freedom. Every day holds both the possibility of relief and the shadow of inevitability. For Charles Victor Thompson, the first date on the Texas list, waiting has become an existential exercise. Decades have passed since his conviction. He has survived appeals, procedural hurdles, and the relentless bureaucracy of the system. Each letter from his attorney feels like a lifeline, a tether to the world beyond the prison walls. Yet with each denied motion or failed appeal, the tether frays. The calendar becomes a constant, quiet reminder that, despite hope, the end is scheduled. Across the country, Ronald Heath in Florida experiences waiting differently. He has developed routines that structure his days: exercise in the small yard, reading, correspondence, and prayer. Each routine is a shield against the unrelenting psychological pressure. But no matter how carefully time is organized, the date looms. Even mundane moments, meals, showers, or brief interactions with guards, are measured against the countdown in the back of his mind. Waiting is both monotony and terror. The small things take on monumental significance. A friendly conversation with another inmate can become a lifeline. A letter from family can evoke both comfort and despair, as it reminds the recipient of the world they will soon leave behind. Inmates learn to parse the smallest details: an attorney's delayed response, a court notice arriving slightly late, the subtle shifts in prison protocol, because every moment may signal progress or setback. The passage of time is both a weapon and a teacher, sharpening awareness and deepening suffering simultaneously. Psychologists studying long-term death row inmates note a pattern of what has been termed temporal distortion. Inmates often lose the natural sense of time. A single hour may feel like a week. A week may stretch into a month. Decisions that seem minor to outsiders, the timing of a court filing, the scheduling of a visit, the arrival of a meal, take on exaggerated importance. Time itself becomes the silent oppressor. Isolation amplifies these effects. For many, death row cells are small, controlled spaces. Interaction with others is limited to a handful of hours per day, often under surveillance. The outside world is reduced to letters, occasional visits, and brief glimpses through barriers. News comes filtered, often incomplete. The passage of months and years can feel like a slow erosion of self, as human contact, the lifeblood of social existence, is carefully rationed. The mind begins to fill the gaps. Inmates replay past events, contemplate regrets, and imagine futures that may never come. Some retreat inward, meditating or reflecting. Others become hyper-aware, constantly analyzing their surroundings, the tone of a guard's voice, the timing of a meal or a legal document. Small changes become monumental signals. Waiting is an exercise in heightened perception, a constant vigilance born of survival instincts and the psychological burden of the looming execution. And yet, amidst the anxiety and isolation, there is resilience. Some inmates develop routines that create a sense of agency. Reading, writing, learning, even small acts of kindness toward others become anchors in a world defined by uncertainty. For Tony Carruthers in Tennessee, the act of writing letters to loved ones and documenting personal reflections offers a semblance of control over a life otherwise dictated by external forces. For Gerald Hand in Ohio, meditation and physical exercise provide mental and emotional structure. Families, too, feel the weight of waiting. Parents, siblings, and children watch the calendar with dread, calculating days, weeks, months. For victims' families, the anticipation of an execution can be emotionally exhausting, a cycle of hope and fear, closure and doubt. The system creates tension not only for inmates, but for every life touched by the process, extending the psychological shadow far beyond the walls of the prison. The waiting is compounded by the knowledge that time itself is finite. Inmates witness older peers die of natural causes or illness. They experience the slow deterioration of the human body, the fading of faculties, and the inevitability of mortality in real time. This awareness heightens the tension, reminding them that the date is more than a number. It is a measurement of the end of life, not just a legal proceeding. For some, spiritual belief becomes a refuge. Prayer, meditation, and reflection provide a framework to confront fear and uncertainty. Others turn to intellectual pursuits, reading law, history, or philosophy, to occupy their minds and create meaning. Some engage in dialogue with counselors, chaplains, or therapists, navigating the emotional landscape of waiting with guidance. The coping mechanisms are as varied as the people themselves, but all share the same underlying goal: survival of the self, if not the body. Even with routines and coping strategies, the emotional strain remains relentless. The knowledge that a specific date has been set creates an unshakable tension. Inmates describe a dual awareness: the ordinary reality of daily life within the prison and the extraordinary weight of the finality that waits. They live in two dimensions simultaneously: the immediate, mundane moments of survival and the abstract, looming certainty of the future. It is this dual existence that defines death row life. Every choice, every conversation, every movement is experienced under the shadow of inevitability. Waiting transforms ordinary human experiences into charged emotional events. Meals, letters, phone calls, and visits are not routine. They are anchors in an otherwise suspended existence. The psychological effect is cumulative. Year after year, decade after decade, the shadow grows longer. Isolation intensifies. Anxiety compounds. Reflection deepens. And still, the execution date approaches, precise and unyielding. Even small changes, a delay in legal filings, an unexpected stay, or the arrival of new evidence, can provoke emotional upheaval. The mind becomes a battlefield where hope and fear clash constantly. It is in this prolonged waiting that the system achieves one of its most profound effects. The punishment is not only in the execution itself, but in the anticipation of it. Time, stretched across decades, becomes a silent enforcer, shaping lives, thoughts, and behaviors. Inmates are tested not only by law, but by the relentless passage of days, months, and years. Understanding this waiting is essential to understanding the human side of the death penalty. Behind every number, every name on the 2026 calendar, is a life lived under this extraordinary temporal pressure. It is not simply a sentence. It is an immersive psychological experience, a slow burn of human emotion that shapes character, thought, and perception in profound ways. As we prepare to move into the final chapter, we will explore the reckoning, the culmination of the process, the execution, the societal debate, and the reflections that follow. Here, the system, the people, and the waiting converge. The emotional, psychological, and moral weight of the death penalty becomes tangible not as an abstract concept, but as lived reality. If you feel the intensity of these stories, let it resonate. Comment your thoughts, share your reflections, and subscribe to stay engaged with these critical narratives. These stories are not distant headlines. They are human experiences unfolding in real time, and they deserve to be seen, understood, and remembered. The execution chamber is silent long before anyone enters. Outside, the world moves on. Traffic hums, children play. People go about daily routines unaware of the monumental weight unfolding behind prison walls. Inside, the air is dense. Time has already slowed for those whose lives are scheduled to end. The hours before execution are filled with ritual, precision, and a strange sense of inevitability. Every step, every action, is governed by procedure. Yet, in these final moments, the human element asserts itself in profound ways. For decades, inmates have awaited this day. They have lived under the shadow of the calendar, counting the years, months, and days in isolation. They have navigated the machinery of the legal system, endured the psychological pressure of waiting, and confronted the reality that their lives are not entirely their own. Now, the reckoning has arrived. It is the intersection of law, morality, psychology, and human emotion, a convergence of every factor explored in previous chapters. But the execution itself is only part of the story. Justice, society, and personal reflection extend far beyond the chamber. For victims' families, the moment represents closure, albeit imperfect. For the condemned, it is the final confrontation with fate. For the public, it raises questions that have haunted America for generations. Is this justice? Is this moral? Is the system reliable enough to make decisions that are literally irreversible? Across the United States, in 2026, each scheduled execution tells a different story, yet they all share a common structure. Judges, lawyers, and correctional staff have carried out procedural requirements meticulously. Appeals have been exhausted. Legal stays, if granted, have expired. The system has acted according to law. And yet, the human stories behind these cases are still alive, vibrant, and unresolved. Charles Victor Thompson's final days in Texas illustrate the paradox of the death penalty. Though his legal appeals have concluded, he exists in a state of reflection, imagining futures that will never come. His thoughts are private, his emotions raw. The years of waiting have reshaped him. The execution is not only a legal endpoint, but a profound psychological event, the culmination of decades of anticipation, fear, and reflection. Similarly, Ronald Heath in Florida navigates his final hours with rituals learned over decades, writing final letters, reviewing past correspondence, seeking solace in prayer, or quietly observing the routines of the prison. Even these small acts carry emotional weight. They are gestures of control in a situation defined by inevitability. They are attempts to reclaim humanity in a system that has stripped autonomy to its bare minimum. The complexity of the human mind in these final moments cannot be overstated. Inmates may experience conflicting emotions: fear, resignation, anger, sorrow, even fleeting hope. They may replay their entire lives, imagining what could have been or reflecting on choices made long ago. The psychological intensity is unparalleled, yet it is experienced silently, behind walls, shielded from public view. For the families on the outside, the reckoning is equally complicated. Victims' relatives may feel a measure of closure or relief, yet they are also confronted with the stark reality of the finality. Parents and siblings of the condemned may endure grief, guilt, and societal judgment. The emotional landscape is messy, multifaceted, and profoundly human. No amount of legal structure can fully contain it. Society, too, is forced to confront the moral dimensions of the death penalty. Each execution sparks debate. Was justice served? Could the system have made a mistake? Is capital punishment morally defensible in a modern, democratic society? Scholars, ethicists, journalists, and ordinary citizens grapple with these questions endlessly. The execution calendar becomes not just a record of events, but a reflection of societal values, priorities, and doubts. In 2026, America continues to grapple with the paradox of the death penalty. Some states execute with relative regularity. Others impose moratoriums or delay due to legal, logistical, or ethical considerations. The public is divided. Some see the death penalty as justice for the gravest crimes. Others see it as an imperfect system with too much potential for irreversible error. Each execution forces a confrontation with these tensions, a reminder that the law is only part of the story, and morality, emotion, and human perception are equally powerful forces. The condemned, however, experience the reckoning differently. The years of waiting, isolation, and reflection culminate in a moment that is simultaneously legal, psychological, and existential. They confront their mortality in a way that no ordinary human ever does. Every memory, every regret, every lesson learned or unlearned is amplified in these final hours. The psychological intensity is beyond most comprehension, yet it is lived fully, moment by moment. And yet, amidst this darkness, there is humanity. Even in the shadow of death, inmates show acts of courage, reflection, and compassion. Some write final letters seeking forgiveness or reconciliation. Some offer last words of comfort to those around them. Some reflect quietly, accepting what cannot be changed. In this, there is a profound lesson about the human capacity for dignity, even when faced with the ultimate loss of freedom and life. The execution is only the outward manifestation of decades of waiting, struggle, and legal navigation. It is a final punctuation mark on a sentence that began years, sometimes decades, earlier. But the reckoning is never merely about the moment itself. It is about the cumulative weight of the system, the years of psychological pressure, and the moral questions raised for society at large. For viewers, this chapter is a reminder. The death penalty is not abstract. It is experienced in lives, in emotions, in decades of anticipation, in the legal mechanisms that bring a human being from conviction to execution. It is experienced in families, communities, and a nation grappling with the balance between justice and morality. As the final moments pass, the chamber doors close, and the world moves on. Life continues outside, but the legacy of each case remains. It exists in public debate, in legal precedent, in personal reflection, and in the haunting awareness of what the system does when it wields its most final form of punishment. The 2026 calendar will be remembered not only for the executions themselves, but for the lives, hopes, fears, and reflections that preceded them. It is a record of human endurance, legal rigor, and societal questioning. And as the camera pans back, the story is clear. This is the reckoning, not only of those on death row, but of the nation itself, grappling with justice, morality, and the profound cost of finality. If you followed this journey, you understand something deeper than headlines. You understand lives measured by decades, the weight of law and morality, and the human stories that survive behind prison walls. Comment your thoughts, share this story, and subscribe, because conversations like this shape understanding, empathy, and the way we reflect on justice as a society. The 2026 execution list is more than dates and names. It is a mirror, a reflection of law, morality, human endurance, and the ultimate reckoning that comes when time, justice, and life intersect.